Hello, everyone, and welcome to iCritic Live. This is Kevin T. Rodriguez, film critic of iCritic.net. This is the podcast where we talk about entertainment, pop culture, and life in between. And one of the topics that we try to avoid on this channel is politics, but that's becoming harder and harder for a couple of reasons these days. One, politics is finding its way in your face, whether you like it or not. I think I've discussed Donald Trump and the Trump administration multiple times just because things he's doing actually have been affecting the entertainment we consume and the business we talk about. Also, if you've been watching South Park, you'll know that they've been doing pretty much a nonstop. This whole season has been a huge middle finger to Donald Trump. And Matt Stone and Trey Parker said, well, we try to avoid politics, but Donald Trump has become pop culture. So I decided, you know what? I already did one episode where I talk about the Trump Bible because it was just such a serious thing that as a Christian, I had words about it. And I said, let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's actually talk politics and let's tie it into movies. But I didn't want to do this one alone. It's one of those, if I'm going down, I'm taking down some poor defenseless person I just invited over the email to join me. And that is Pat Koenig. I hope I pronounced that last name
It's
right.
Conkey, yeah. Pat Conkey.
Conkey. Okay, so Pat, because I can pretty much guarantee your channel has very little, if any, crossover appeal with my viewers, tell us what you do.
You might be surprised. I've got quite a variety of people that watch, actually. But what my program is called Culture, Faith, and Politics. So it's a podcast, audio podcast and YouTube podcast. And I deal with, culture, faith, and politics. And, really it's mostly politics lately, just because, like you said, Trump has sort of inserted himself into almost every aspect of our lives. So, whether you're a supporter or an opponent of him, which I'm an opponent of his pretty strongly, we can't avoid talking about it. And I'm glad that you brought up his impact in your area, of interest, movies and that sort of thing. It's entertainment. He's impacting everything. And so we do kind of have to talk about it. A quick background on me is just that I was an evangelical pastor for 20 years. I was a conservative Republican before I retired in 2016. I just happened to retire in 2016. And that's when I started paying attention to politics again and saw what was going on with Donald Trump. And I was kind of never Trump from the jump. And here I am. I started speaking out and I'm still speaking out.
Yeah. So one of my friends made a very interesting observation, like probably the best thing from the Trump presidency was that it got people who used to never pay attention to politics, paying attention to politics and their impact. And it's like, well, that's also a sad commentary on how things have to get really bad for people
in my
pay
case,
attention, if you will.
In my case, I was super involved in politics for many years before I went into pastoral ministry. I was super involved in what I would now call right-wing politics. I didn't view it as, I was just the way I was raised. But when I went into ministry, I consciously disconnected from politics so that because I didn't want it to poison my relationships, the way I related to people, the way I preached. So that's why in 2016, when I retired, I started paying attention again. And it was like, wow, things have changed, and I had changed in those 20 years too.
Well, the church that I grew up in, Gateway, I mean, I remember when the elections would come around, Pastor Ken would do teachings on the elections. But the funny thing is he might almost be considered woke the way he taught them, because I even remember, like, in one of the elections, one of the things he made very clear was, I do not believe George W. Bush is an evil man, and I do not believe John Kerry is an evil man.
Right.
And it's like, well, we don't get a lot of that these days, unfortunately.
Right.
So, So, and just to make my position clear. I was never a Trumper. I never voted for him either time, but I think I took the first election in stride until January 6th. I felt he should have never been anywhere close to the presidency after that. And while I wouldn't necessarily say I'm an opponent of his, because I always pray for the leaders that they hopefully do what is best for us, I very much oppose the vast things he does.
Yeah, right.
And he talks to the point where I even went to the pastors of my current church and said, hey, look, you know what? I'm glad that you don't bring politics into sermon. I'm glad that you try to keep it about the word. I'm glad that when you talk about leaders, you go biblically and you don't use examples. But just out of curiosity, is there a line Donald Trump could cross where it would actually be considered unchristian to not say something? I believe he's crossed that line, but is there a line? And the pastor thought that was a great question, by the way. And at first he said that the reason they weren't saying anything is because the stuff that he was doing was affecting the Constitution and democracy more than the biblical stuff. But they did say they were concerned about how immigration was going, and that might warrant a sermon. And sure enough, a few weeks ago, they finally did a lesson about what the Bible says about treating the strangers in our lands. And even though Trump wasn't said by name, because they do that on purpose, there are Trump supporters in my church.
Right.
It would be very hard, unless you were willfully plugging your ears, to not know that they were referring to the policies of the Trump.
That's beautiful.
It lined up almost too perfectly.
Yeah, and that's what I think. So, if I were still a pastor, that's probably what I would be doing. I think I would have gotten myself fired by now, honestly. But if I were able to avoid getting fired, I would be preaching on all of these issues: immigration, demonization of people, just all that kind of stuff. I would be focusing on what is biblical justice. And there are ways that every political party can be held accountable to being more just, and so it's like, I think if you focus on those principles, it's going to cut against whoever is in power at the time, but especially it's going to cut against Trump right now. I just believe that. So
I believe that too. Now, that being said, I knew that at some point, because it doesn't matter how much you want to stay at politics, especially if you see such injustice. You've heard stories of and by the way, I put off the Hitler comparison for a long time, like a really long time.
Right, it's a good way to get people to stop listening to you, but there's parallels.
Right, but I don't want to be like when you see something really bad happening, that person who just always sat by and didn't say anything is kind of like, I feel like at some point I should make my position clear, if only to clear my soul and say I said something. But who could I have to come on? Because the people who talk about, faith and politics, it's like there's not always a lot of overlap to the guy who makes the history videos about what won the best animated feature Oscar in a certain year and what was its competition. The next episode, by the way, folks, has been delayed because of copyright issues, but if you support me on Patreon, you can watch it early. And that's when my eagle eye noticed in the background you had a DVD, one of my favorite movies of all time. And what was interesting about this is that I actually, despite the R rating and despite the fact that it is a hard R, if you will, I actually consider this to be a very Christian-themed movie in many ways. Great. And it's like, okay, this might be my guide to come on and talk faith in movies.
Yeah, I love Magnolia. I mean, I know that that's not the main topic we're going to be on tonight, but I'll tell you, it is my favorite movie.
Okay, well, my favorite's Amadeus, but this is one of my favorites.
I like Amadeus too. I like Oh Brother Where Art Thou. I like Mary Poppins. Kind of a wide range of movies that I like. But
I feel stupid. I've never seen Oh Brother Where Art Thou, and I've
oh
owned
yeah,
it for I don't know how many years.
I love the Coen Brothers. My wife and I right now are going through all the Coen Brothers movies in order. Yeah, and
Hudsucker Proxy is probably their most underappreciated one.
Yeah, and I had never seen that until a couple of weeks ago as we're going through these. But they're from here. They're from St. Louis Park, Minnesota, just a little ways from here. Went to school, the same school that Al Franken went to, and Peter Himmelman, a musician that I really like, a Jewish neighborhood there that they grew up in. And they made that movie, A Serious Man, about that neighborhood.
That was a good movie too.
right. Yeah. And so anyway, I just love those guys. But yeah, there's just but Magnolia is just, I wish that I could say, the reason I love this movie is because of these deep spiritual themes, and like, obviously I did love those things and they're very, thought provoking, but honestly, I watched the movie about 20 years ago or so, maybe a little more. I forget when it came out, but the reason I have this is because a friend of mine lent it to me and I keep forgetting to give it back to him. So Nate, if you see this, come get your movie. But I'm never giving it back unless he asks for it. But I loved it the first time I saw it, and I thought I need to return to this. But I had little kids at the time, and so I didn't have a lot of time for movie watching. And then
and it's 3.5 hours. Like it's
right.
Not like a short watch.
Yep. And then a few years later, my son actually said, "Hey, I love this movie Magnolia." And I'm like, "Oh, I've got that movie." And he's like, "Let's watch it together." So he turned me back onto it. We watched it. And what's funny is that my mentor in ministry, Ned, he's an older guy than me. And he likes very linear movies. And so he watched it. And he was like, "I hate that movie. I don't know what's going on. I despise that movie." And I said, "Ned, let's watch it together." And so we watched it together, and I kept pausing it so that he could ask questions and I could say, "Here's how this relates to this. Here's why this is happening. Watch this character develop." And 4 or 4.5 hours later, we were done. And he was like, "That's one of the best movies I've ever seen." So that was I consider that kind of a victory.
Yeah, and even though Paul Thomas Anderson had made it clear he didn't realize the connection between the frogs and Deuteronomy until later on, and decided to add hints about that. But I do like the theme that how there's like this really weird, bizarre act of God that almost seems so random, but it kind of puts all of these people back on the road that they need to be. Which I always thought that was like, wow, that's a very profound illustration of how, God's almost overseeing of everything. Because realistically, he's the only one who could see the moving parts in all these people's lives and could think of something so strange to do that would kind of get them all to stop.
Right. And what I loved about it, what I loved even about that part is that he's very careful in the way that he constructs the movie and this is so much like real life, where you could find a rational scientific explanation for why that happened, and the way that he sets it up, where there's this storm. This could have been a tornado that lifted them out of the water and, and dropped them there, because that sort of thing has happened with fish and stuff like that in history. And so he leaves it open to, which I think is profound, because again, it's like real life, where it's like, if you have eyes to see it, you can see the hand of God. But if you kind of refuse to see it, he leaves us out all the time to explain things away too. And I thought that was even pretty profound.
Right. Even highlighted by, we don't want to give away like the ending, but when that one character tells that other character, "You need to start treating me better." And
yes,
the other character despite having seen the same miracle, if you will, brushes it off and says, "Go back to bed."
Yeah, right.
Like, like we're all given a chance to change our way of thinking, and
Exactly.
some people will still just turn away and say no. And I also like how none of the characters in this movie are truly evil. Now, let's make it clear, there's one character that does something that is very evil.
Right.
And he just, well, ironically, he not only gets his dues, but God also has mercy on him in a way with this crazy event, if you will. But it's, it's always hard when you have a movie, especially in today's age where people are, we are a little super sensitive. Let's be honest, where it's like, we don't want to admit that people who do evil things might not necessarily be evil at their core.
Right. Yeah. These are damaged people. They're damaged.
Right. And Tom Cruise, who absolutely should have won an Academy Award for this. No offense, Michael Caine. This was a much better performance than the Cider House Rules. Okay. Even though we kind of joke like, so is Tom Cruise acting, or was he just actually showing who he was for the first time with his strangeness? Yeah. But his character was the most interesting because the first time you see him, he says the most vile things that frankly almost made me turn the movie off. It was really bad.
Right.
It was his philosophy, which seems more something like would be more embraced today, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, there's so a lot more guys like him right now out in social media.
Yeah, with the Andrew Tates and things like that.
Right. He's an Andrew Tate kind of character.
Right. But even him, like, the movie takes time to show that these vile thoughts didn't come from nowhere, and in fact might even be the coping mechanism to hide really the pain he's felt his entire life. And it's like, I just thought that was so interesting how at the end you were really rooting for him to turn over a new leaf. And I even think they hinted that he wasn't completely evil because because even though his whole business was anti-woman, his interview was with a woman and he was actually fairly respectful to her for the most part.
Right.
Which showed that was like the first sign, like, is this an act? Like, does he actually believe the hate that he's spewing?
Right.
So, yeah. And by the way, so folks, I know this movie's like 1999. Paul Thomas Anderson's directed One Battle After Another this year, which is one of the best films of the year. But this was definitely, in my opinion, what made him a star director.
It's definitely worth seeing, and it's a really rough movie. It is, like, be prepared for that. But it's it is
beautiful
though too.
Yeah, it is a hard R, although I would argue if you have to say it's a hard R, maybe it should be NC-17. I don't know. I don't know why we have that rating if you never use it.
Right. Yep. But the thing that just to be, say this quickly, that what really attracted me to the movie was just the beauty of it and the complexity of the storytelling. And so it was all the art of it, and it was the music. I love Amy Mann.
So it's Oscar nominated song.
Yep. Yeah. She wrote one song for the movie, if I remember right. And the rest were songs that already existed that sort of prompted him to write this movie based on songs that she already had written. And I love Amy Mann, and I had a Till Tuesday album when I was in high school that she did this song with Till Tuesday called Voices Carry. That was a big hit when I was like in high school or something like that. And so her music is throughout, and I just find the whole thing beautiful.
Yeah, no, I agree. But as you said, this is not the main movie we're talking about. Now, one of my favorite genres of documentary, if you will, has always been documentaries, because sometimes real life is stranger than fiction. And I think thanks to things like Netflix, which found a way to make it like bingeable, people are more into documentaries now more than they ever have been. But I remember keep in mind, documentaries have been around since the 50s, but like I remember like in the 90s and 2000s, there seemed to be like almost a resurgence of documentaries, a specific genre that I kind of nicknamed the activist documentary or the propaganda documentary. And these were documentaries that were trying to make a point about something, whether it be about a leader or a movement. Sometimes the intentions were noble, sometimes they were nefarious. I remember in 2000, I think it was it 2001 or 2004? I forgot what year the second Bush election was. It was probably 2004. That was like the year where like two of the biggest documentaries came out, Fahrenheit 9/11 and Super Size Me. Both movies made a lot of money at the box office. Both entertaining to various degrees. Both had very big points. One was, this president is dangerous and he needs to be removed from office come the election time, although Bush almost seems like a teddy bear in comparison to what we have now.
Right.
And one was about really think about what you eat, what you put in your body. And by the way, Super Size Me was one of the few movies I remember seeing in theaters over all horror movies and everything, where midway through the movie, I just was acutely aware that people had stopped eating their popcorn.
Oh, I've never seen that actually. Yeah. I should watch that sometime. Yeah.
I had never seen that before either. But here was another thing about these things is that people believed in the messages, that they were so important. They kind of made these activist documentaries like must-see events. Fahrenheit 9/11 was the #1 movie that weekend and made over $200 million. Super Size Me made 60 or 70. I remember when Bully came out several years later, it made like $35 million. And keep in mind, people, documentaries are usually lucky if they make 50 cents.
Yeah, right.
Because they're usually going to play in a few theaters. Okay, they'll probably make 50,000 at the end of the day, but bottom line, documentaries typically don't make a lot of money. Well, there was a movie that actually, also before we move on to this, I should also preface this. It was kind of almost made like you had to see these movies for one of two reasons. Either this was going to reinforce your belief in that particular topic, or you needed to see it so that you could have some rebuttals to it if you disagreed with it. And it seemed like for a while, we had heard about this movie that came out in 2024 called God and Country, which, as you can see from the poster, or if you can't see because you're listening to the audio version of this, it says WWGD, What Would Jesus Do? Which, by the way, if you just ask that question in general for most aspects of your life, you will definitely feel your head exploding when you realize your mortality with the answer to that question. But this movie actually got a lot of attention. People were writing about it. I was actually kind of prepared for this to be like the next big documentary that everyone was going to say, you have to see this so that you can see the truth. And then you would have the opponents, your Ben Shapiro's, your Charlie Kirk's, who, by the way, Charlie Kirk does feature in this.
Yeah, he's in there a couple times.
Yeah, he's in there a couple times saying some things that are not quite as compassionate as his reputation now would have you believe.
Right.
Would be seeing it on behalf of their viewers to tell you what was wrong with it. And that didn't really happen. And I find it fascinating because it actually kind of almost discouraged me just because it showed what a weakened state movies were in. But as I asked people about this, it kind of became clear most people didn't want, and when I say most people, I'll actually specify evangelical Christians for the most part. They not only didn't want to watch it, they didn't want other people to watch it either. And so I figured, well, I'm a film critic. You're an anti-Trump pastor. Maybe we should talk about it. Now, before we talk about the movie itself, I think there is at least one elephant in the room we have to address, and this would probably be the first thing that you can share. This movie was produced by Rob Reiner. Now, Rob Reiner, talented director. He's made some of the best movies of all time. Stand By Me, All Good Men. He also made one of the worst movies of all time, which was North. But
Well, this is Spinal Tap.
Yes, he made this a Spinal Tap.
That's one of my top 10 movies.
Yeah, that's a great movie. So he produced this. Now, and when I say he produced this, basically he saw the movie and decided to put his weight behind it to get it out there to people. Now, normally this would not be worthy of bringing up, but there is at least one thing that kind of like, as I could say, could sour the mood. He is an atheist, and he rejects organized religion. Now, again, if you don't want to believe anything, that's perfectly fine, but I was actually surprised that this was the reason, or the excuse, I should say, because I think it was more of an excuse, where a lot of Christians said, you can't even watch this movie because it can't be trusted. It's being released by someone who is not even a Christian. What skin does he have in the game? What are his intentions for putting his might behind a movie like that? So, as a pastor who's admittingly not a film critic, what would you say to that concern that you have this movie that I think we're both going to agree has some very important things that Christians should probably hear, but it is being produced and primarily released because of the efforts of a godless heathen, if you will. Like, is that reason enough to have pause for concern from your perspective?
Yeah, and no, it's not. And this is one of the big straw men that it's red herring, I should say, that people throw out all the time. Where, I mean, and it's a big difference between me and maybe a lot of other, pastors or whatever. Is I just, I adhere to this old saying, all truth is God's truth, first of all. And that there's truth out there that you don't have to be a follower of Jesus in order to be able to talk truthfully about some things that are important. And there's an awful lot of supposed followers of Jesus right now who are definitely distorting the truth in the interest of politics. And sometimes it takes somebody from outside the camp to call attention to it. Now, I'm trying to be somebody from inside the camp who's calling attention to these things. And what's funny is the very same people who will tell you, you shouldn't listen to this because Rob Reiner is an atheist, will also say, you shouldn't listen to Pat Conkey because he is not a real Christian, as evidenced by the fact that he opposes Donald Trump. So it's just this real, I mean, I'm sorry, it's just a completely false argument. So it's like they will find something to throw a person out for. People have for years now just ruled me out as like they call me a leftist, a Marxist, all these things. And it all comes down to, very simply, sure, he's an atheist, but among Christians, for people who support Donald Trump, it's come down to this thing where Jesus says, I will be the sword that divides, father from son, mother from daughter, that sort of thing. And he says, based on your belief in me, it's going to divide families. It's going to divide relationships. In the Christian camp, it's become Donald Trump is that sword that divides. If you believe in him, then you're a real Christian. If you don't believe in him, you're not. And I know, as absurd as that sounds, dozens of times every day I get told these things. I'm not making it up,
Well, I kind of believe it. I've seen your comments, by the way. Thanks, Callie Teacher, for the $20 super sticker. So someone did comment, and I do like to bring up the comments once in a while. Don't watch this movie because it was produced by an atheist. Not too different from people saying don't watch Last Temptation. someone Jewish or someone unfaithful worked on that movie. Yeah, Last Temptation of Christ actually does also have some biblical truths in it, even though it's not Christian produced.
Yeah, and I want to address this because I think it's really important that I watched this movie and I was impressed. Now
which one, God and Country or
God and Country? God and Country.
All right,
because and what I would ask your audience, whether you like Donald Trump or you don't like Donald Trump, I'm not here to tick anybody off, but
yeah, I do have some viewers that like Donald Trump, and made that clear. And we're not here to shame you, for the record.
Yeah, right, exactly. So what I would say is, please take this movie seriously. Please watch the movie. Please take it seriously, because yes, you could say that, maybe Rob Reiner and Dan Partland, the director, you could accuse them of nut picking. How people will do that online, where you find somebody who's crazy and you put them out there to represent, your opponent or whatever. They call it nut picking. That is not what these guys are doing. These guys actually, they put people that I respect in there as commentators, people who are serious Christians, people who are, many of them came from the conservative movement in the same way that I did. And then I left it because of Donald Trump, same way they did. David French, Russell Moore, people like that. Very serious scholars, many of whom I've interacted with myself. And so I know that they're real people who really believe these things, and they're sincere Christians. So what this movie is not doing is trashing on Christianity. It's Christians who are talking about this, even though it might be an atheist that produced it.
Yeah, and like I said, Rob Reiner was a producer in the sense that he saw and he used his weight to get it released, but other than that, he did not actually contribute to the making of the movie. And by the way, since we have a lot of animation people who watch my channel, Phil Fisher is in this movie, and his inclusion was actually
VeggieTales.
Yeah, he created VeggieTales. His inclusion was actually like the line in my review, which I unfortunately can't find at the moment, that got people laughing, where I wrote, like, the world is not in a great place when the creator of VeggieTales has some concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. And Phil Vischer and Skye Jethani, who's also in the movie, are they have an incredibly good podcast. Why am I drawing a blank on it now? Oh my gosh, I'll think of it in a second. I listen to it all the time. But anyway, yeah.
And I don't disagree with this comment that Rob Reiner is about as far left as you can go. I mean, he's pretty far left. I'm not going to lie. But you could be far left and still say something that is truthful. The two are not mutually exclusive. And again, he didn't actually produce this. Well, he didn't direct, he didn't write, he wasn't there interviewing anyone. So let's read the very brief description on Wikipedia. God and Country is a 2024 American documentary film directed by Dan Partland and produced by Rob Reiner. The film discusses the emergence of Christian nationalism and its close relationship with far-right politics in the United States, exploring its perceived threat to democracy and the politicization of Christianity. The documentary is based on Catherine Stewart's book, The Power Worshippers, which came out in 2020. It is distributed by Oscilloscope Laboratories, which that might be another reason why not a lot of people saw it. If Sony Pictures Classics, for example, had released this, it probably would have been seen at least by a few more people. And now that's the description, but I would say what the movie is about at its heart is about people who love Christ, who love people, and who are deeply concerned and troubled by seeing the people they love taking the thing that should mean the most to them and should be the biggest inspiration for good and using it as a weapon for things that they consider to be not good. And by the way, I will say that one of the ways that these things are most effective is that usually their actions start with like a very basic question. Well, don't you believe in this? Don't you believe in this? And of course, when you get to like the bare basics of things, like, yes, I agree with that, but then you always have to add the but.
Right.
I don't want to take it down this road. Either. And plus, as Penn Jillette once said, politicians throw around such nonsense terms like pro-life and stuff. Everybody is pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
It's whether you're for or against abortion.
Right.
That is the issue. So I made some notes. I don't know if you did. I'm not going to show the notes. But the movie actually opens, I think, very profoundly, where one of the pastors, and by the way, I'm very bad at names, so, if you remember the names.
William Barber with the Martin Luther King quote. Yeah.
Yes. And where he's thinking, where Martin Luther King is like going past the churches and he's kind of wondering what kind of Christians worship in those buildings and what do they fight for?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we start with that quote? Because I'm going to be honest, I find myself thinking the same thing sometimes when I pass by buildings. I just kind of wonder, what are they teaching their people? And what's really scary is that when I was younger, this would have never been a question.
Right.
Brief little freeze there, but that would have never been a question in my mind when I was like a kid or even a teen. It's like, well,
right.
Christians teach, Jesus and being kind to one another and helping one another, and maybe some of the more extreme ones talk about how you'll burn in hell if you watch Terminator or sex scene. I don't know, but it wasn't much of a question. Where now I actually do find myself wondering what gets spoken in these buildings sometime. I don't know. As an ex-pastor, what did you think of that opening?
Well, I thought it was incredible. William Barber is, the head of, I think it's the Poor People's Campaign, just a very, very highly respected African-American pastor. And the quote was, it started with, "When I look at all the injustices in the world, and I drive past churches and I see these high steeples," this is his quote in Martin Luther King, like you said, "with their big steeples, I wonder what kind of people worship there. What do they care about? Are they at work in the world for those things that look like love and look like justice and look like truth?" And that question really defined why I do what I do. And what's interesting is that you just said the same thing I would have said a few years ago, which is basically, I never thought about that question before. I never looked at the people that I was involved with in churches and thought, well, what's really going on? What do they really believe? And are they working for justice and stuff? But Martin Luther King asked that question way back then. That was a very real, pertinent question for Black people in America back then. And it's like, what I'm learning is just how much of that injustice, how much of the justice dynamic is from the Bible was missing even in my own preaching. Because now I did become aware of a lot of this because the church that I planted was in the inner city of St. Paul. And so it was in an immigrant community. So we have a lot of Hmong people in the community, Somalis and African-American. I was definitely in the minority in that community. So I started to become more aware of these issues. But I think a lot of people, myself included, until you experience until you're in relationship with oppressed people, and right there, and I use the word oppressed, people will say, oh, he's Marxist. Well, Jesus used the word oppressed all the time. The Bible uses the word oppressed all the time. So I'm using a biblical term. Until you're in relationship with these people, you don't realize not just the injustice that Christians are perpetrating, oftentimes to try to hold on to power, but just for people who are very well intentioned that just aren't even aware of justice issues. And I would say that was me before I spent 20 years ministering in the city.
Yeah, well, that's very good. Now, the next point that note that I made was that, and I think you have touched upon this I know you've touched upon this many times on your videos, is that it was primarily evangelical Christians that made Donald Trump the president. He would not have won without it. And a lot of people claim to be Christian nationalists now, but what this movie is pointing out, as well as several pastors in this movie is pointing out, that Christian nationalism is more about an emotional connection to what people feel the nation should be. It's not really connected to the love of Jesus, if you will. And I assume you agree with that.
There were several definitions of Christian nationalism just in this movie. And that's a very real piece of all this, that it's hard to get a common language around what is Christian nationalism. Is one of those things where you can say, well, I kind of know it when I see it. But the fact that we don't have an agreed upon terminology about it is what makes it possible for somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, to say, I'm a Christian nationalist. I'm a Christian and I love my nation. It's like, well, that's not what Christian nationalism is. But
she said that in this very movie, in fact.
Right. And so Russell Moore in this movie towards the end gave a couple of good descriptions. I mean, he said Christian nationalism uses Christianity for an end, and that end is authoritarianism. And this is true. I mean, Christian nationalism is a political movement more than it's a religious movement. That's another thing that's true. And he says nationalism in this movie, he said nationalism is usually idolatrous and self-exalting. There's a difference between nationalism and patriotism. Nationalism is usually idolatrous and self-exalting. Patriotism is gratitude for being in a country as magnificent as this one. And so there's all these distinctions, but what it comes down to, Christian nationalism is a false gospel. It's a heretical belief system that says that we are to bring in God's kingdom through force, whether that force is political force or military force or whatever. And where Jesus just again and again says, my kingdom is not of this world, but wherever we are, wherever Christians are, we're to be demonstrating God's kingdom through our compassion and our care and our love. And so the power of the Holy Spirit. So it's just, it could not be more different. Christian nationalism, the gospel of that, the false gospel, to the way of Jesus. So that's how I see it.
And also, I think Christian nationalism is kind of an oxymoron term, because it's like, I don't recall. I mean, granted, I'm probably not as skilled in the Bible as you are, but I try to read it every day if I can. But I don't remember Jesus talking about America. I don't think he even talks about he doesn't even talk about nations that much. He doesn't talk about, political power. I mean, they try to actually trip him up with the whole taxes question, because everyone hates taxes. This is the greatest chance to trip him up. Jesus basically does the famous, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, basically saying, that's not really my concern. If you know what I mean. So Christian nationalism, you're right, it is a movement, kind of like how I see the prosperity gospel as a movement and the charismatic movement as a movement.
If I could, I want to make sure and make this point, that if you want to see Christian nationalism right now, what it is. I mean, there's soft Christian nationalism, which I think like a lot of Americans just it's almost our birthright as Christians in America, that we have sort of this soft Christian nationalism. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and we're also not saying don't be proud to live in America.
Right.
Like,
and
I'm proud to live in America.
Right, exactly. But if you want to see the ugly face of Christian nationalism, look at Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is an avowed Christian nationalist. He would call himself that. The tattoos that he has on his chest, read about that stuff. He was born and raised just 30 miles north of me here in Forest Lake, Minnesota. And he's, I've said he's the worst Minnesotan since Charles Lindbergh. So he is, he's a very avowed, outspoken Christian, but he's part of this movement out of Moscow, Idaho, that's led by Doug Wilson. And you can find Doug Wilson now is there's CNN interviews and things like that. You can learn about him. And this is a horrific movement, and it's gaining power. And so the fact that Pete Hegseth is exalted by this movement, and they accept him as a great Christian man when he, right now he's accused of murder, of these boats. The second strike on that boat, killed them all that's going on. Mm-hmm. But long before that, he, for instance, was accused credibly of raping a woman in a hotel room. And this was while he was divorcing his second wife, and his third was to become his third wife was pregnant with this child. And then he has this incident with a woman in a hotel room where she says she was drugged. There's a police report. He filed he paid her, I think, $50,000, if I remember right. And she signed a non-disclosure. And then he admitted to it all in front of the Senate during his confirmation hearing, except that he said it was consensual. And
right, that's why she filed the police report.
Right. And so what I'm saying is a Christian nationalist would see no contradiction, because a Christian nationalist doesn't believe the gospel. A Christian nationalist is not about the teachings of Jesus, trying to live in the way of Jesus. A Christian nationalist is about protecting what they would call Western civilization, about protecting our culture and being a warrior for that. And so Christian is a tribal signifier to a Christian nationalist. It's not a faith commitment. So they can look at somebody like Pete Hegseth and say, "You go, girl."
Yeah.
So
well, in this movie, there are many scenes of pastors promoting the image of a gun-toting Jesus,
right,
like who's strong and a warrior. And there was even like one guy who he doesn't even look like a pastor. He's got like regular shirt and like a ball baseball cap and things like that. And he's basically saying Jesus was not this prissy little girl figure that they have in the painting. Jesus was a warrior. Jesus was well, I guess he looked like this in this guy's eyes. And the funny thing is, isn't every Christmas with the songs and stuff, we acknowledge we thought God was going to send a warrior, instead he sent like a child and a regular.
Right.
What happened to those teachings?
Right. Yeah.
That was what was going on all the time that I was going to church.
Yeah. And this goes back a long time, but I even remember not so long ago, I guess several years ago, Mark Driscoll, who was, the pastor of Mars Hill Church. This was before Trump became president, where Mark Driscoll, I listened to a sermon that he preached where he was saying, we don't worship a feminized Jesus with product in his hair. We need a muscle bound Jesus and all. And I just thought, I think that's your problem, Mark. I don't think I don't think you're speaking for the rest of us.
Right. In fact, there's so many passages to kind of suggest that. I mean, maybe Jesus had some muscles because he was a carpenter, but
Right.
he never used those muscles. He didn't get into fights.
Right.
He laid hands on people. He showed compassion, which Charlie Kirk famously said he didn't like compassion because it made people weak. It's like, well, then what does that make the Jesus you proclaim
Right.
to serve?
Right.
If
Yeah.
if compassion is weak.
Right.
So again, and by the way, the reason I'm using this South Park Jesus picture is because the idea of a gun-toting Jesus is about as ridiculous
Right.
as you can imagine. But this is basically what they want
Right.
from their Jesus. And
it's
yep,
insane what they want, you know.
Yep,
and
yep. And you know, I know some people are going to like look at this when they look at.
Well, did we lose you? Did you lose me?
Folks, sorry, press the wrong.
That's all right.
Wrong button. I meant to. That's the problem when you have a mouse that has like a back button on the side, and you go to click it, and then, but yeah, some people might look at this movie and say, well, like a lot of those, those radical statements, like with the Greg Locks and stuff, it's like they're just one part of the larger message. So what's the context? And it's like, you know what? Here's the thing. As someone who totally believes in context, I want to state that some of these statements are so radical, it's kind of like, I almost don't want to know the context because I'm sure this might actually make it worse.
Right.
Because things are so hateful and angry that it's almost like, what could the justification be? It's like hearing that comedian say that really awful. Well, okay, I'll use the example where Michael Richards, Kramer from Seinfeld, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this.
Yep.
Had that racist bit at the Laughing Factory and called a couple black people the N-word over and over and over again, and made comments about hanging them with pitchforks up their butts and things like that. And even though at first he apologized, later on he's going like, well, I thought I was making a joke, and then I decided to take it further and further. And it's like, dude, I just don't think there was ever a context that would have made this okay.
Right.
There's just some places you don't go.
Yeah. And what I would want people to know who are watching this is when you see, like, Greg Locke is one of the guys you're talking about, who's just, I mean, he comes across as insane in this, the clips of, I don't want to call him Pastor Greg Locke. He's a pastor supposedly, but he comes across.
Is it just me, or does it sound like he's barking whenever he's speaking?
Yeah. And it's not just you. And the thing is, it would be tempting, like I said earlier, to say, well, they're just picking some crazy people. And yes, they're picking some of the more public, extreme people who are espousing this sort of thing. But I know these people. I know lots of these people who follow people like that. And then especially, so there's that kind of guy. And then there's these ones who are really into the prophetic movement. If people want to read about this, they can read. There's a couple of great books that you can read about these things. One is The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory by why am I drawing a blank? My brain isn't functioning tonight. By the way, the podcast that Phil Vischer has that I wanted to bring up earlier is the Holy Post podcast. Yes, I always think of things when I stop trying to think of them. But anyway, the Kingdom,
and the co-host talked extensively in this movie.
Yeah, Sky Jethani, and Phil Vischer. But The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory is a fantastic book if people want to be introduced to some of this stuff. And the other one that's very powerful, very well done, is it's called The Violent Take It by Force, and that's about the New Apostolic Reformation, which is this very authoritarian charismatic, but beyond charismatic. It's this prophetic thing that is just off the rails, where these people, and there were several of them that showed up in this movie that claim to speak with the authority of God, and the Holy Spirit says this, and they were the ones that were very active January 6th, praying for that whole thing, doing a Jericho march and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a great movie. A great book, The Violent Take It by Force, if people want to study some of these things. And I'm just telling you, these aren't thousands of people. These are millions and millions of people who believe these things.
Well, one of the facts that were brought in was that some of these conservative donations have gotten up to $1.6 billion,
right,
with a B,
right.
And one of the people who used to fundraise for that, and again, I don't remember his name, but I think it was Rob Schenck. But
Rob Schenck.
Rob Schenck. Yeah, he admitted that when he was doing his fundraising for his church, he how should I put it? He used fear and hate to basically drive up the donations.
Yeah,
because it was a very effective way to do it.
Yeah, that's what the political people told him he needed to do. And I wanted to address that because, and this relates, also to this thing about, well, should we listen to, a movie that's made by an atheist? Well, one of the best books out there.
Well, he produced it. He didn't make it.
Right. I know. Yep. But one of the best books out there, if people want to read it also, is written by an atheist. It's Jonathan Rauch. And it's called Cross Purposes: Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. And I'm getting back to what Rob Schenck said, where he said that the Christian media industry is all about stirring up fear and anger. And he said, now it's out of control. And 40 years into it, we have Christians who are just terrified. And that's the way political people want them. And so Jonathan Rauch, who is an atheist, in his book Cross Purposes, the whole point of his book is he's apologizing for having written years ago that Christianity was going to go away in America, and great, we don't need it. He's apologizing because he's saying, actually, America needs people of faith to act like people of faith. And so he's making, as an atheist, he's making a case for the teachings of Jesus and calling Christians to live by the teachings of Jesus. And he says three things that he boils Christianity down to, three things that he wishes Christians would remember. Number one, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. And that strikes right at the heart of what Rob Schenck was talking about, that this whole right-wing Christian echo chamber is built on making people terrified and furious. So he says, don't be afraid. Number two, imitate Jesus. Number three, forgive each other. And he's like, if Christians would live by these principles, it would change everything about our politics, and then we would be able to fulfill the role that we've been fulfilling in this society. So I just think that's some pretty good work from an atheist, and I'm glad I'm reading it.
I agree, and I would definitely like for Christians to be known for their goodness rather than their anger these days, and really their fear. My mother-in-law is always fearing about the end times and stuff like that because she subscribes to that whole Left Behind gospel thing, which
right.
That's a whole nother topic. Yeah. But my whole thing is well, look, even if you subscribe to that, you're going to be okay if you really are saved. Why are you so afraid of this? And it's I don't know a lot of Christians these days who aren't angry,
right?
And it makes me, definitely makes me concerned for them as much as everyone else. And of course, one of the things that makes me want to do episodes like this is because it's look, I'm seeing a lot of hurt being done by man, I'm seeing people treated terribly, and I want to do something to draw attention to that fact. And so, okay, yeah, maybe I'm talking about a documentary. It's a movie. It's what I know personally. But the reason this one just stood out some more was just because this has the wise Christians that I want to see more of in the world.
Right.
And one pastor who ironically mentions that they used to use Donald Trump as the kind of Christian you don't want to be.
Yeah.
But then years later, his fellow pastors were supporting, like, he's our guy, and he's like, what the heck happened?
Right. Well, yeah, that's Russell Moore that said that.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but
right. But he was right.
That was basically the thing. Like, what the heck happened here?
Mm-hmm.
Now, go ahead.
There's something I'm sorry, you were probably going to ask me something.
No, go ahead.
Well, there's something you brought up earlier, maybe before we went on the air, where you asked about things that they predicted in this movie, or, how that's turning out, that sort of thing, things that they said might happen. And I just want to say that I've said for a long time that you can judge a theory in general, the value of it based on its predictive ability. Mm-hmm. And my theory of the case forever has been that the conscience of Christians in America who follow Donald Trump is going to be debased. My first book, the subtitle is Resisting the Debasement of the Christian Conscience. And so you'll see people accept more and more and more. You'll see people accept things that they would have sworn 10 years ago they would never accept. And that's what we're seeing. And so, like, this movie is built around, it begins and ends with January 6th. And it shows the Christian involvement in that. And a lot of the Christian commentators in the movie that they're talking to talk about being shocked when they saw January 6th unfold. I was not shocked at all. I was expecting it.
I'm going to be honest. I was only shocked in that I was really hoping I would be wrong about that. But as they point in the movie, like, look, they were bragging about doing it. And by the way, one of the people who was telling people to come out to the Capitol and march it was Charlie Kirk, which, I mean, look, he should not have been killed, and I'm actually still very bothered. I did do a podcast about why Charlie Kirk's death bothered me, even though, frankly, I think he was kind of a piece of crap human being. I'm sorry, Jesus. That's kind of how I feel.
Well, I had written several things about him, and I had said several things about him, so I can't deny the fact that I opposed what he stood for. The reason I keep bringing
him up is because, since we want to respect the dead, if you will, people are almost revising what he was actually like sometimes. And in this movie, you see clips where he's using the scripture as a way to strike fear into people, and he's one of the ones calling people to go to the Capitol and raise your arms. It's going to be an unforgettable day. And it's like, well, what do you mean by raise your arms? I mean, it's kind of like, I was reading, I think it was called Divided, a book about the January 6th attacks, and when they were like, after Trump said, like, I'm going to march with you, people were like saying, like, so wait, you do realize what you just said, right? And he's like, well, they don't mean I'm actually going to march with them, right? Like, it's kind of amazing how a lot of these people say, like, well, I said it, but come on, I was joking, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, there's some things that just aren't funny. Joking about rape, joking about murder, Larry the Cable Guy. There's just some things that are just never funny.
Yeah, and so the thing about that January 6th thing is, so, like I said, I predicted the debasement of the Christian conscience, and just as an example, I have friends and family members who were appalled when January 6th happened, who are Trump supporters.
Oh, me too.
And they were like,
they said never again.
Never again. And I said at the time, if he becomes the nominee, you will vote for him. I will not. He's not going to become the nominee. And I'm like, he's going to become the nominee. And when he does, you're going to vote for him. And they denied. And then sure enough, all the all the excuses come, and then not only did they vote for him, his first act, and this is not in the movie because the movie is made before this happened. His first act was to pardon them.
Yeah, this was a movie that was trying to warn people of what worse could come.
Right. And his first act was to pardon those January 6th rioters. And it's like, and not a peep out of Trump's Christian supporters, not a peep out of the people who swore to me that they would never support him again.
Yeah. And, some of those same people, like their excuse was, and we won't get into this, but it's like, well, the alternative was worse. And I mean, unless you're just a single issue voter who really hates abortion and gay marriage, it's like, I don't really know how you could have looked at the other side and said that's worse.
Yeah, it's really.
Honestly, if anything, Biden was boring. Mm-hmm. He was boring.
Yeah, it's just downright. It's just downright offensive to say that the other side is worse. It's just that's a leap away from reality that is just offensive, and it's beneath anyone who claims to have a Christian conscience to say somehow, yes, there's a couple of cultural issues that some Christians would like to see enforced into law. Okay. There's a disagreement with Kamala Harris's positions. Okay. It is deeply offensive to say that she in any sense is even on the same plane as Donald Trump. And I get frustrated because people say this to me. You can probably tell. People say this to me every day on my channel. And what I keep saying, here's the thing I'll say again, is they use that as an excuse after the primaries. But during the primaries, evangelical Christians were the main supporters of Donald Trump during the primaries. Right. Against all these other Republicans. And so there's something going on with white evangelical Christians that you can't just sweep away with, well, Donald Trump is better than the Democrats. No, you chose Donald Trump over every Republican candidate in the primaries. There's something going on, and this movie's getting at some of it.
Right. Not me. I voted for Nikki Haley.
Yeah, I did too in the primaries.
For the record,
I don't like Nikki Haley, but I walked down to my voting thing in the snow and I voted for her because, I'm not looking for perfect.
No, so. You're never looking for perfect. Right. And by the way, one of the things this movie mentions is basically that, Christians vote more than non-Christians. So I would also like to say to the non-Christians who are listening to this and blaming the Christians, you know what? If you're listening to this and you don't vote, you have the power to get out there and offset this.
Yeah, right.
a little bit. That's really the only political, it seems strange to say this. That's really the only political statement I want to make in this. We're trying to keep this related to the Bible.
Related to movie. And the movie, the movie just gets at a lot of this stuff because I think a lot of people really have trouble understanding, like what's the attraction? How can Christians vote for Trump? And I think that this movie does a really good job of answering that question on a basic level for people.
Right. It gets to what the basic fears are, what the basic concerns are. And by the way, if Democrats would listen to some of these concerns, maybe they would get some of these voters too. Right. They take some extreme positions on things where it's like, I've actually told, because I actually have friends who run for office, and I won't say which issue because I don't want to embarrass them, but I tell them, you really need to get off this issue because people don't want it. I don't care how nice it sounds. They don't want it.
Right.
And they don't want it enough that that Donald Trump actually doesn't look that bad just because he's against it. And that should speak volumes that maybe the world is not ready for this yet.
Right.
So and before people say oh, but people weren't ready for the civil rights. No, people were making progress by the time the civil rights came around. As I'm going to quote Penn Jillette again, you can't legislate compassion.
Right.
So you have, and by the way, Christians better than anyone should know this, because Jesus didn't legislate anything in his life. He told stories, and he reached out to people, and he moved people, and we have the ability to do that,
right?
Even through movies like this. And that's where a gift should be. Now, the final thing I want to end on, we didn't even get through all the notes, but
there's so much to talk about.
I try to keep there's so much to talk about. Maybe a part 2 down the line, I don't know, but I find myself insufferable after an hour, and I've kept you around for 70 minutes. Heck, more than 70 minutes, because we talked for 15 minutes before this show started. But probably the most troubling quote in this movie for me, and it's troubling because this one I see it in so many people. And again, you're going to have to tell me which I think this was the bishop, or what pastor this was. He was the black pastor at the beginning of the movie.
William Barber. Yep.
William Barber. Okay, it's William Barber again.
There's also Jemar Tisby. He's a black scholar who was in there.
It wasn't the scholar. It was the pastor, but he had some good points too. And by the way, his disappointment looked very real.
Oh yeah.
I mean, but yeah, William pretty Barber. Much said it was amazing that the things that the Bible does not say that Christians are so loud about, and the things that the Bible does say that they are so quiet about. And look, I want to make it clear. Look, I am a Second Amendment supporter. I do believe in your right to bear arms. As Christians, this should not be one of our biggest concerns.
Right. The God and guns thing is
Yep. The whole tax breaks and stuff, economy wise, business wise, it makes sense. You can't take the money with you when God spoke against building riches, probably because when you start getting $1.6 billion in donations, you start twisting the word into something that you use to make more money, not to spread his love.
Yeah, that changes a person.
Yeah, so that quote sticks with me, and it still bothers me. I didn't think it would bother, because it's I've seen this movie a couple times before, and it still bothers me when he says it, because you can hear the sadness in his voice. You almost hear defeat in his voice. What am I doing? It doesn't seem, if you're not getting this message. Right. So I want to ask you specifically how you felt when you first heard that.
Yeah, I felt sadness, and I felt the same sadness when Jemar Tisby shared a similar thing, where he talked about, Jemar Tisby said, I was not a Christian growing up. I became a Christian, I think he said in high school, if I remember right, or college, I forget. But then there's pictures of him in a youth group kind of setting, or young people setting, where he's the one black face out of a bunch of white faces. And then it shows him in a bunch of different settings as he's, because he's a very, very highly respected scholar, and so it shows him in all these different settings where he's his black face, all these white faces. And he said that when it finally happened, that that the people that he had been in relationship with for so long, when they finally voted for Donald Trump, 81% of white evangelicals, so the people he was surrounded with, that he was friends with, voted for Donald Trump. And he talked about how much that hurt. And he said, it was completely confounding to me that other Christians would proudly support a man who would play in these racist tropes and stuff, that this man would be their champion, it felt like a betrayal. And when he said that, I could just sense the same thing. I could just sense his pain, that it's like, wow, I'm part of this movement. We're brothers and sisters. And yet you're going with this guy. And there's just a blindness. And I know people get upset when, they'll say that we make it all about race. When I talk about, white evangelical Christians, 81% voted for Trump. But as I think it was Catherine Stewart said in this, I forget who it was that said it, you cannot ignore, might have been Kristen Kobus DeMays actually, but said you cannot ignore the word white in this, white Christian nationalism, white evangelical Trump supporters. You can't ignore it. And that, I think, is the most offensive thing for most of my friends and family who are Trump supporters to hear. Yeah. When you start talking about race, people get their hackles up, they get really defensive. And I'll just say this, so I don't forget to say it, that the one thing that's different between me, and we alluded to it at the beginning, the one thing that's different between me and my family and my friends, from growing up and everything, is this. I stepped out of the echo chamber for those 20 years that I was a pastor. Like I said, I stepped out of it. I stopped following the news, and I did it so that I wouldn't be kind of poisoned against my own people, who disagreed with me. And by stepping out of the echo chamber for 20 years, when I step back in, it's like, wow, this is toxic. I had detoxified myself, and I'd become aware of things I had never been exposed to before too. So that's what's different about me and all of my friends and family who still support Trump. It's not that I'm smarter. It's not that I'm better. Like somebody said in this movie, if you lived in the setting that these Trump supporters live in, you would probably be wearing the red hat too.
Yeah.
It takes an intentional work to step outside of that context. And as soon as you do it, I'll just tell you, you get cast out. You get cast out of the community, and they say you're not really a Christian, which is insane, but that's what you say. That's what they say.
Well, as someone who lives in Southern California, even when I vote for conservative, because I technically am a registered Republican, I voted more blue than ever in the last presidential election, not the last special election. We were just voting on Prop 50. But when I do vote for some conservative things, it's like, yeah, I actually do agree with them on this. There's people who actually say, well, you're not like a kind human being. And I guess if there is one, aside from watch this movie and really think about it, I guess the other thing I'd say I'd want people to realize is like, just don't like paint someone as like not Christian or evil just because they don't do a certain thing you believe.
Right.
And because, Yep. And also, be careful as a Christian how much you debate. Like one of my friends who he used to be a big debater, and then he stopped because he kind of realized, and he said it in such a funny way. He was like, I kind of realized I'm probably not going to get to heaven and see someone and say, so how did you get saved? And the guy's going to say, well, I lost a debate, and so now I'm stuck here.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So that was like a great way of looking at it. So anyway, I do want to at least mention where you can watch this, and this certainly does not help people's case because it's not on Netflix. You can't stream it on any of the streaming services. You can rent it on Amazon or on Apple TV as of the moment of this recording. And by the way, you can rent it on Apple TV for $1. I think that's $1 very well spent.
I got ripped off then because I bought it on Amazon Prime. So
I bought it on Apple TV for $20. Like, what an idiot, right? Granted, I've watched it 3 times, so if you add up the rental cost, and I think at the time they were charging $10 to rent it, so it was like I'll spend $5 more and own it because digital is not ownership, folks. By the way, if anyone's offended by any of the things we said, that's another reason why I want to encourage you to watch the movie. And like, if you can find things where maybe you feel you're being misrepresented stuff, I'd love to hear the conversation. I think a lot of us does. Guinea Pig Dan says, thanks. It looks like an interesting doc. You're welcome. Can you be the guinea pig? Okay, that was a bad joke. Whatever. Thank you so much for watching Guinea Pig Dan. Appreciate it. So that, folks, is where we're going to end this discussion. And really, I mean, if I wasn't such a considerate host, we probably could have. I mean, I kind of wonder what it would be like for us to do like almost, do like one of those watch things where we watch the movie, we stop it at multiple points to talk about what being. One, I wonder how long that would take.
It would take a long time. I would have so many thoughts. Yeah,
because it's a low documentary, but we definitely highly recommend it. So, thank you for joining me, Pat. Once again, why don't you share people where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm on Culture, Faith, and Politics on YouTube or on Substack or any of the audio podcast platforms. Culture, Faith, and Politics. That's what it is.
Culture, Faith, and Politics. Yes, so you can subscribe there. And also, if this is your first time here, for the record, these conversations are rare, but who knows, if you leave comments and say you like Pat, maybe I'll find other movies we could tie into Christian topics and things like that. I've actually got one in mind, maybe in the future. But
I love not talking about politics. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you like what you hear overall, though, hey, why don't you make it official? We're on all the podcasting platforms of choice: Spotify, Apple, Deezer. Not Google Podcasts anymore because they ended that, killed by Google, of course. If you're listening to this podcast where comments are available, please leave a comment. And as always, flame responsibly and have a good one and love one another. Take care.